She seduced my stepfather to steal my inheritance, but I owned the mansion, the cameras, and the final move. I always knew something was off about her. There was a sweetness to her that felt just a little too deliberate, like a costume worn too well, like she was always waiting for a camera to pan across her smile. I was 32 when I married Rachel, 29F, and I really thought I'd found the one. She was elegant, ambitious, warm in a rehearsed kind of way, and she never asked too many questions about my family, which I found oddly refreshing at first, until I realized it was because she already knew more than I ever told her. See, I grew up with a fractured home. My mother remarried when I was 15 after my dad passed away, and her new husband, Greg, 50M now, was the type of man who measured worth in dollar signs and brand labels. He never liked me, made no effort to pretend otherwise, always talked like I was in his way, like I was a reminder of my mother's previous life that he was trying to erase. He was rich, inherited wealth, ran some shell companies I never understood, and he owned this sprawling estate just outside the city that people called the Belmont House, tall iron gates, imported marble floors, chandeliers like glass waterfalls. It was the kind of place that turned even the most grounded person into someone they didn't recognize. My mother used to say it would all go to Greg's son someday, except Greg didn't have a son, just me, and he hated that, hated it so much that when I moved out at 19, he didn't say goodbye, didn't even look up from his phone. But years passed, and something changed. Greg got sick, my mom softened, and suddenly I was being invited back into the house like I'd never been exiled to begin with. I came out of obligation, not forgiveness. I wasn't interested in their lives, but I knew the house might eventually be mine, not out of love, but law. Some weird clause in my late grandfather's trust that said the property would revert to my mother's bloodline if Greg never had heirs, and that meant me. Greg hated it, of course. He did. He tried everything to fight it in court, but it didn't hold up. The mansion was technically under a family foundation I controlled through my father's name, not his, and though I never mentioned it, Rachel must have found out. I don't know how or when, but I started noticing things, how she suddenly suggested visiting Greg more often, how she dressed a little too carefully when we went, how she laughed at his dull jokes like they were genius. At first I thought she was just being diplomatic, keeping peace, until one night I came home early from a business trip and found her gone, her phone off, her car not in the garage, and it was Greg who answered her call when I tried her number. His voice tight, breathless, said she must have left her phone at his place, asked me not to worry. I didn't sleep that night, my mind unraveling every memory like a reel on fire. Every smirk, every casual touch between them that I hadn't noticed now screamed betrayal. The next day she came home like nothing happened, said she'd gone for a walk, forgotten her phone, but her lie was too smooth, too clean. I didn't say anything, just nodded and made breakfast like usual, because I needed proof, not theories. I needed to know for sure before I did anything, so I started watching, quietly. Obsessively, like a ghost in my own marriage. I checked bank statements, tracked her phone location, set up hidden cameras in the house. I was losing sleep, losing weight, but I couldn't let go until I saw it with my own eyes. And then it happened. One Thursday afternoon while I pretended to be in a meeting across town, I watched the footage from our living room camera as she left in heels too high for errands, makeup too heavy for daylight, and when she got to Greg's place, she didn't ring the bell. She used the key, and he greeted her at the door like he'd been waiting, like this wasn't the first time. And when I saw them kiss, something inside me didn't break, it exploded, not just from pain but from the sheer absurdity of it. My wife, my stepfather, and the mansion in the middle like some twisted trophy, except the joke was on her, on both of them really, because what they didn't know was the mansion she thought she was seducing her way into was already mine, had been mine for the past 7 months. Greg never told her, probably didn't want to admit defeat, and now I held every card they thought they'd stolen. And this is where the real story begins. I didn't tell anyone what I knew, not at first, because I needed more than confirmation. I needed to understand the depth of their deceit, how far it went, how long it had lasted, how much of my life had been rewritten behind my back by the two people who were supposed to be on opposite sides of my existence, the woman I chose and the man I never did. I played the fool because I needed them to keep their guards down. I needed to see it all before I set fire to the stage, and the days that followed were a masterclass in pretending. Rachel smiled at me like he hadn't just been in his bed, cooked my meals, kissed me goodnight, whispered plans for our upcoming anniversary while probably arranging another secret meeting with Greg, and Greg, well, he was more smug than usual, more generous too, invited me for drinks, started sharing stories about his youth as if we were suddenly equals, even called me son once like he was daring me to react, but I didn't. I just nodded and waited, because I already had the key to destroy them both and I wanted the moment to be perfect. I called my lawyer under the pretense of revisiting my will, had her send me copies of the estate paperwork, title transfers, legal signatures, everything I'd need to show without a doubt that the Belmont house was no longer Greg's to offer, that Rachel wasn't about to inherit a single brick of it no matter how good she was at lying in silk sheets. Then I hired a private investigator. Not because I needed more evidence of the affair, but because I wanted leverage, if they were willing to betray me like this. I needed to know what else they were capable of, and what I got back shocked me more than the affair itself. Turns out Greg had been siphoning money out of the foundation accounts, moving small amounts over years into offshore holdings, and Rachel, clever Rachel, had helped him, not directly, but through shell transactions and dummy consulting gigs she conveniently forgot to mention. I had all the receipts, names, amounts, dates, and once I had that, I didn't just feel betrayed anymore. I felt powerful. I could see the chessboard now and I wasn't the pawn they thought I was the storm. I waited 2 weeks before I made my move, just enough time to make Rachel comfortable, to make her believe her plan was working. I took her out to dinner, ordered her favorite wine, complimented her dress, and told her I was thinking of retiring early, maybe moving into the Belmont house full time. The way her face lit up almost made me laugh out loud. She was glowing, practically vibrating. Probably imagined herself redecorating already, hosting charity luncheons, giving interviews about the beauty of legacy. I let her dream because I knew I was about to wake her up in the most violent way possible. And Greg, I visited him the next day, told him I was considering merging some of our shared assets into a personal trust for Rachel's benefit. His eyes narrowed for just a second, just enough to tell me he was nervous, and then he smiled and told me he'd draw up some numbers. I nodded and left. And that night I didn't sleep, not because I was anxious but because I was excited. I'd lived under the weight of other people's decisions for too long, and now I was going to burn their lies to ash and build something better on the ruins. The trap was simple. I sent Rachel a fake legal notice addressed from Greg's lawyer, stating that Greg had transferred full ownership of Belmont House to her in light of their deepening relationship. The wording was just enough to make her believe the affair had finally paid off. She opened the envelope in the kitchen. I watched from the doorway as her hands trembled with excitement. She didn't even try to hide the joy, just ran to me and said we had to celebrate, and that's when I knew it was time. I told her to invite Greg over for dinner, said we could all toast to the future together. She didn't even flinch, just texted him right there in front of me. I went to the cellar, grabbed the oldest bottle of champagne we had, poured 3 glasses, and waited. Greg arrived like a man stepping into his victory lap, brought flowers, kissed Rachel on the cheek, didn't even acknowledge me at first, just sat down like he owned the place, which made what happened next even sweeter. I handed them both their glasses and told them I had a surprise. I opened my laptop, turned it toward them, and pressed play. The screen filled with security footage from the last 3 months, hallway cameras, bank logs, email threads, voice recordings, everything. I watched their faces melt from smug to stunned to horrified in real time. Greg stood up first, tried to shout, but I cut him off, told him the cops were only a call away, and that I had enough evidence to bury him in court. As for Rachel, she looked at me like she didn't recognize who I was anymore, and she didn't, because the man she'd married was dead, replaced by the one who'd been watching, waiting, building his moment. And I wasn't done yet, not even close. They didn't speak for a long time, not really. Rachel just sat there blinking like a doll that had been dropped one too many times, and Greg paced like a man who'd never been told no in his entire life. The silence between us thick like wet wool. I let them drown in it. I didn't offer comfort or anger. I just watched, calmly, coldly, like I was observing the end of a performance I never wanted to see in the first place. Then Rachel finally whispered something about forgiveness, about misunderstandings, about love being complicated, but her voice cracked halfway through and I could see she knew it was over, not just the game but the entire illusion she'd built around her life. I told her there was no coming back from this, that the paperwork she'd received was bait and she had bitten it perfectly. And when she looked at Greg for help, I saw something in her eyes crack for good, because he didn't move, didn't speak, didn't defend her, he just looked down at his glass like he was mourning a future that never existed. Then I dropped the final piece on them. I slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents showing not just the legal transfer of the Belmont estate under my name, but the forensic report from the investigator about Greg's embezzlement and Rachel's role in the financial fraud. It was all signed, sealed, admissible in court, and I told them they had exactly two choices: either disappear from my life quietly and permanently, or I'd let the law do the talking. Greg went pale. I don't think I'd ever seen him afraid before, not really, but in that moment he realized the empire he tried to build was now a prison made of paper and ink, and the only key was held in my hand. He tried to threaten me, of course, said things like legacy and reputation and family, but I just laughed, told him reputation was a currency he'd already spent and family was something he'd never had the right to claim. And Rachel, she was crying now, not sobbing, just a silent waterfall of everything she'd just lost. Me, the house, the money, the mask she'd worn for years. I told them both to leave, now, no theatrics, no explanations, just walk out and never come back. Greg stormed out first, muttering curses I didn't care to understand. Rachel stayed a little longer, said she didn't mean for it to go this far, that she'd only ever wanted to feel secure, to have something of her own. I told her she could have had everything if she'd just been honest. But now she had nothing because she tried to take what wasn't hers through lies and skin and whispers. She begged me not to go public, not to ruin her career, her name, but I wasn't listening anymore. I simply opened the door and held it there. She walked out without looking back, and I closed it slowly, feeling the weight of years of betrayal fall off my shoulders like dust. I spent the next few days cleaning the house, not just physically but emotionally. Every room held echoes of manipulation, of conversations that now sounded different in memory. I cleared out the closets, burned letters, deleted photos. I walked the grounds every morning just to remember it was mine now, not just on paper but in truth, in silence, in air. It was no longer haunted by ghosts of what could have been, just a quiet monument to what survived. I made sure the legal threads were all tied up. I sent Rachel's lawyer a cease and desist, had Greg's accounts frozen for audit, and then I disappeared from the social circles they used to flaunt me in. No more charity events, no more dinner parties, just me in the house and a freedom I hadn't known I needed. And it wasn't long before the stories started to spread, not from me but from the whispers of those they tried to charm again. People saw through them now, without the shine of the mansion behind them. They looked small, desperate. Greg was caught in his own lies and Rachel's reputation took a hit she couldn't spin, and me. I stayed quiet, didn't defend or accuse, just let the world piece together what it wanted. I started writing again, something I hadn't done in years, just scribbles at first, then full thoughts, entire chapters of truth wrapped in fiction, but it helped, it bled the poison out slowly. Until one day I stood in the hallway of Belmont, staring at the portrait of my father that hung just above the staircase, the only thing Greg had never taken down, and I finally smiled, not because I'd won, not because they'd lost, but because I had finally reclaimed the one thing none of them had ever truly touched, myself. Months passed and the silence around me deepened, not the kind that aches but the kind that heals, the kind that allows you to hear yourself think again after years of noise. Dressed up as love, I kept to myself, rarely left the mansion except to run errands or take long drives along the cliffs where the sea reminded me how small betrayal really is compared to freedom. Rachel tried reaching out once, just once, through a mutual acquaintance who asked if I'd be willing to meet her for closure. I declined, because closure isn't something you give to the person who set your world on fire. It's something you find in the ashes, and I'd already found mine. I heard she moved to another state, tried starting over, changed her last name back to her maiden one, tried therapy or yoga or God, I don't know, and I don't care, because she's someone I used to know, someone who lived inside a story that no longer belongs to me. Greg, on the other hand, wasn't so lucky. The audit destroyed his credibility, the court proceedings took whatever money he had left and scattered it across fines and settlements. He's still out there somewhere, probably trying to con someone new, but his name doesn't hold weight anymore. It's just another footnote in someone else's cautionary tale. Sometimes I wonder if he ever realized how close he came to having everything, and how greed cost him more than I ever could have taken by force. As for me, I rebuilt, slowly, quietly, not just my finances or my house, but my mind, my sense of self. the pieces of my life that had been chipped away by years of being underestimated, overlooked, replaced. I started working again, consulting mostly, nothing flashy, just steady projects with people who respected me for what I could do, not what I could give. I traveled too, places I'd always wanted to see but never had the time or courage to explore: Greece, Japan, Morocco, each trip peeling off another layer of who I used to be, revealing something tougher, sharper underneath. Then came the inheritance, unexpected but poetic. My mother passed away quietly, a heart attack they said, and she left me everything she had, not much, but enough to know that maybe, just maybe, she'd seen what Greg had tried to do and chose me in the end. Her final word spoken through a signature and a will. I stood at her grave and felt nothing for a long time, then suddenly everything at once: pain, love, confusion, regret, and above all, peace, because even though we never reconciled, I knew she'd tried, and that was more than I'd ever expected. I hosted my first event at Belmont last month, not a party, not a gala, just a quiet dinner for the people who stuck by me when things fell apart, friends who didn't ask for details, just showed up with wine and laughter and stories that filled the rooms with something real, something warm. We sat under the chandelier and toasted not to revenge or justice but to survival, to clarity, to the quiet kind of triumph that doesn't need to be shouted from rooftops to be felt in every bone. And when the night ended and the house was still, I walked the halls again, barefoot, with a glass in hand and a memory in every corner, but none of them hurt anymore. They were just there, like old furniture you don't use but can't throw away. I stood on the balcony looking down at the driveway where it all began, where Rachel used to wait in the car pretending to be innocent and Greg used to stand like a king on borrowed land, and I whispered to no one in particular that they'd never win again, not here, not in this place, not in me. So if you're wondering whether I regret it all, I don't, not the pain, not the betrayal, not the years lost to liars, because sometimes you have to lose everything to realize what was never yours to begin with, and when you finally take it back, you hold it tighter, you protect it better, and you never again apologize for locking the door behind you. So what do you think? Did I go too far? Or did they just fall into the trap they set for me years before we even met? Like, comment, and subscribe if you've ever had to burn the bridges just to feel the warmth. Because sometimes the villain of their story is the hero of your own.